I'm so very conflicted right now because on one hand, hey, race cars are back on track, racing, it was competitive, that type of stuff. But on the other, probably bigger hand, that was the worst NASCAR race I think I've ever watched in my life. How's it going, everybody? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove. And yes, today we're reacting to two things. We're going to talk about the Clash, of course, which just happened earlier this afternoon, but we're also going to talk about the Daytona 500 Pole Award qualifying, which we also saw earlier today. I'll talk about qualifying briefly because I really want to spend most of the episode ranting about the Clash, but yes, Daytona 500 pole qualifying happened earlier today. No surprise here, another Hendrick Motorsports car won it. William Byron, the now second-year driver with a new crew chief Chad Knaus, will be sitting on the pole for the Great American Race. His teammate Alex Bowman will share the front row with him. In fact, Hendrick Motorsports actually had the four fastest times in this entire qualifying session. Unfortunately for Jimmie Johnson and Chase Elliott, the only drivers that actually lock in their starting spots are the front two finishers, so the rest of the field, besides William Byron and Alex Bowman, are still going to have to race on Thursday to see where they're going to actually start for the Daytona 500. As far as takeaways from qualifying, it's really hard to judge. It's all single car runs, and we've seen in the past how just because you're fast maybe in single car runs doesn't necessarily mean you're going to handle well and run well in a pack, so it's really hard to get anything out of this. Clearly there's a decision made at Hendrick Motorsports to go all in on qualifying. All four of their cars were literally tenths of seconds faster than even the next highest best guy. From what we've seen in practice earlier this week, the Hendrick cars look pretty good. I think the JGR Toyotas actually are going to work pretty well together. They seem very fast in a group. Even the RCR cars, some of the other Chevys look pretty strong. Can't rule out the Fords. Team Penske was really impressive in the Clash, which I'll talk about in a minute, and they also seem to be pretty good as far as single car speeds were concerned. I haven't yet seen the speed I expected from Stewart-Haas Racing. Even single car runs, they were mid-pack. So yeah, they didn't qualify very well, and I haven't really seen them rise to the top in any sort of group practice session yet, so Stewart-Haas Racing, I'm a little, I don't know, they aren't performing as well as I thought they would, especially after, we saw them dominate Talladega, the most recent restrictor plate race we went to. Maybe it's the Ford Mustang, but like I said, Penske still looks pretty good, so I don't know if it's all, it's all that. But yeah, needless to say, Hendrick Motorsports looked really fast, but we'll see if it translates to the big race itself. Now let's talk about the Clash, the ugliest, maybe the most insulting, the most insufferable NASCAR race I can remember sitting through. There was a race at Auto Club in 2012 that for the longest time I considered to be the worst NASCAR race I ever watched. There's a race that I believe Tony Stewart won, and I was not a big Tony Stewart fan at the time. There was little to no passing, there was 10 seconds between each car, and then to top things off, the race ended up being range shortened at the end of the day. So I, for the longest time, considered that to be maybe the least entertaining NASCAR race I had ever seen. Today's Clash, I'm not going to say it was not entertaining, because at the end of the day I kind of had fun watching it, still riffing with people on social media, and ultimately the finish was just hilarious and for all the wrong reasons. But ultimately it was a terrible race, and not one that the drivers or the fans or the people running NASCAR should be proud of for any reason. So let's give a brief overview of what happened in today's race. An exhibition race, the first official race of the Cup Series season, even though it's not for points, really not for anything other than a little bit of money and, fame and glory, I guess. Let's talk a little bit about what happened. The starting order was drawn at random last night by the crew chiefs. Paul Menard's team drew first. So Paul Menard, due to sheer luck, ended up starting first for this race, and as we saw for pretty much the majority of it, he was untouchable. Now, I don't want to take away from Paul Menard, but he really never faced any pressure at any point during this race until effectively the last lap, which I'll get to. For much of the race, we saw the drivers basically stay in a nice single file line around the outside of the racetrack, looked like 2013. From time to time, we'd see a brave soul duck out of line, try to make something happen, and it almost never worked. Part of the reason we didn't see much passing, especially up front, is because for the first portion of the race, the top four were all Penske and Penske affiliated cars, and so we've seen typically, like at Talladega last fall, teammates don't want to put pressure on teammates. Pretty much the highlight of the race came during green flag pit stops on lap 25 when Denny Hamlin rocketed around several guys, basically just jumped past 3 or 4 cars on his way to pit road. Really daring move, really cool to see. That was literally the highlight of this race, honestly. Now, single file racing definitely isn't that much fun, but to make things even worse, to make things even more grueling for fans to sit through, the race was red flagged twice. Really just drug this insufferable event on even longer than it needed to be. Ultimately though, when all was said and done, we started to see a little bit of racing there on the final restart. We had some 2 wide. Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski, Ryan Blaney were trying to make the inside lane work, but we still basically had Paul Menard leading a freight train around the high side all up until the eventual final lap. So with rain in the forecast and time running out, Paul Menard led Jimmie Johnson and Kurt Busch around the outside lane. Going down the backstretch, Jimmie Johnson had a bit of a run, had Kurt Busch all over his rear bumper, decided to duck out of line, look to the inside of Paul Menard. They made contact. That sparked off a 15, 16 car wreck? I kid you not, 13 out of the 20 cars entered in this race were literally junk after this wreck. Ultimately, that brought out a caution, the rain picked up shortly thereafter, a red flag was called, and then the race was officially declared official. So here's the thing, assuming you watched the race, you saw the finish, Jimmie Johnson made contact with Paul Menard. Jimmie Johnson ended up getting through the wreck, and he was the winner of the clash. So Jimmie Johnson, I know he hasn't won a race in a year and a half, he got a win. I know what you're thinking, I should have led the show with that, right? Like, oh yeah, Jimmie Johnson got a win, let's celebrate. But there's a reason I'm not doing that. And there's a reason why, if you look around social media, most Jimmie Johnson fans are pretty subdued on this Sunday afternoon. It's great that Jimmie Johnson won a race. It's even better that he won a race in his first race with a new sponsor. Like, that's all stupendous, that's fantastic. But when we look back at that wreck, I think most fans will agree that Jimmie Johnson was likely the main guy to blame for the final wreck that ended the race. You can see pretty clearly on the replay that Paul Menard did not really change his line much, if at all. Jimmie Johnson clearly just got up into him and started the big wreck. Now here's the thing, I don't have a big issue with Jimmie Johnson making the aggressive move right there. Rain was coming, we've been begging all race long for these drivers to try and make passes up front, so I have no problem with Jimmie Johnson trying to make that move. But he did cause a wreck that ultimately ended the race. No other way to look at it, at least 90% of the blame has to be on Jimmie Johnson. And my problem is when they interviewed Jimmie Johnson when he came back to pit road, he took zero responsibility for the accident. He actually looked at the replay and said that he thought Menard actually came down a little bit. Jimmie Johnson, I love you, man, but that was the worst interview I've ever seen you give in my life. Jimmie Johnson's always been the nice guy, he takes responsibility for his actions. When he makes a mistake, he owns up to it, like 99% of the time. I mean, right there, he caused the wreck. He wrecked the field for the win, effectively, and it'd be nice for him to show at least a little bit of remorse. Maybe take a little bit of responsibility. Like Jimmie, I know he'll probably go back and look at the replay, see some of the fan reaction, and he'll probably, make a tweet later, or maybe he'll make a statement later this week where he says, yes, I apologize for causing that wreck. I understand that it was my fault. But Jimmie, come on, even in that moment, you have to at least take some of the blame. So Jimmie Johnson taking effectively zero of the blame for that big wreck that ultimately ended the race and gave him the victory was shocking to me. I'm not gonna lie, very, very shocking. And at the end of the day, that's what most of us fans are gonna be talking about. I still like Jimmie Johnson, he's a great driver, but there's a reason I don't have him making the playoffs this year. I think it's safe to say Jimmie Johnson's slipping, just a little bit. It happens to the best athletes in every sport. At some point, they're no longer in their prime. Jimmie Johnson's past his prime. He can say all he wants, I'm not done, I'm far from done, I'm still going to keep competing, all that stuff. He can say that all he wants, but the truth is in front of everyone. 2017 did not end well for him. 2018 was the worst year of his Cup Series career, and the first race of 2019, he caused a big wreck. That's just not Jimmie Johnson-like. We don't see that from Jimmie Johnson that much, but it's becoming now the norm for Jimmie Johnson at the later point of his career. I'm not saying Jimmie Johnson's bad, he's still probably better than most of the drivers in the Cup Series, but he's slipping. The one thing this race does show is that, hey, Hendrick Motorsports looks like they have some speed. But, they did have speed in Speed Weeks last year, and, Hendrick didn't do very well last year, so maybe this race means nothing, but there's some positivity still to come out of this if you're a Jimmie Johnson fan. But every time Jimmie Johnson questions why fans are trying to predict when he's going to retire and everything, I just look at things like this. It's like, you're clearly slipping, man. We can see it. Again, I'm not saying Jimmie Johnson's a bad driver. Honestly, I still think he's a top 10 driver in NASCAR, even with a little bit of slipping. That's how good he was, 5 years ago. But I think it's finally safe to say that Jimmie Johnson is on the decline. Just a little bit. Anyway, that's all I really have to say in this episode. It's really just a reaction to this just ugly race we just saw there today. A few other tip-ins I wanted to throw out there. Firstly, I thought it was hilarious how during the post-race, they kept looking back at the replay, and multiple times, Jeff Gordon, analyst at Fox Sports in the booth, kept trying to blame the rain for the wreck. He said multiple times that, I think they hit some rain. I think that's what caused Jimmie to slip up and get into Paul Menard. I think that's what it was. Stop it, Jeff. Stop it. It wasn't the rain. I know you still kind of have an affiliation with Hendrick Motorsports. I know you can't say anything too bad about him, but come on, Jeff. Stop it. You didn't see any raindrops on the camera lens. They were on the straightaway. Like, Jeff, come on. Stop it. And then another thing I just have to ask is, why did they change this race to a day race? Like, can we stop and talk about that for a minute? This race was a night race for years until, I guess it was rained out in 2017, which is why they ran it in the day. In 2017, it was postponed, but then last year and this year, it was scheduled to be a day race, and they ran it in the day. Why did they make that schedule change? I'm not sure. For many years there, the Clash, the Sprint Unlimited, the Shootout, whatever you want to call it, it was a night race. And I always liked that it was a night race because, it was something different from the Daytona 500. It made the race look different than what we'd see in the Daytona 500. Right now, the Clash now being run during the day just looks like a mini Daytona 500, and that's kind of lame. Not to mention, it seems like these cars typically handle better at night, so I kind of would like to see that more next year. I feel like part of the issue today is that the cars weren't handling well enough for drivers to want to make moves. I mean, we saw the only time a driver really made an aggressive move, it caused a 15-car wreck. So I'd like to see them go back to running this race at night. Honestly, I don't really know why they ever changed it. I'd have to go back and do my research as to if they had any reasons, maybe ratings, maybe they liked that it was paired up with Daytona 500 qualifying now, but I'll be honest, I wish they went back to running this thing on Saturday night. Anyway, you guys, that's all I really have to say about this race. That's my reaction to it. I'm still excited that the NASCAR season is back, and this race had its moments. It did. At least this race wasn't the kind of bad where we're all just kind of sad and depressed and grumpy afterwards. This race instead, it crushed that threshold. And it got to the point where this race was one of those so bad that it's good kind of races. It's just laughable at this point. At least we can look back at this race and just laugh. I know that's probably not what NASCAR wants us to be doing, but it's the only way I can cope with the pain after watching that just grueling event. Anyway, you guys, that's all I've got. Thank you so much for watching. I'm excited still. It is the Daytona 500 week officially now. We've got the duels on Thursday, which I think will be fun. And then, of course, the Daytona 500 on Sunday, which is always a great spectacle, no matter what happens in the race. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. As always, you can follow me on Twitter or Instagram and continue the conversation over there. You can also get an Out of the Groove shirt if you check down there by the description. If you want to support me, support the show, you can check that out. Also, send me some cool stuff to my P.O. box. I got a video planned for later this week where I'll be opening up some of the mail that you guys have sent me over the last few weeks. So definitely go check that out and send me something if you want to. And then, of course, a big thank you to my amazing Patreon supporters. Thank you to Michael Harrison at Gwas of the Stars, SelfishGifts.com, Mentally Defective, Cameron James Ticemore, John Koblenz, Tim Shingen, Jason Arlong, Wesley Donaldson, iFantasyRace.com, and the rest of these amazing Patreon supporters. Thank you all so much for the support. Really looking forward to a big and bright and great and amazing 2019. So thank you for the support. You guys are a huge part of why this show continues to get bigger and better. That's all for me today. Should have a couple other episodes coming out later this week. I might do like a preview episode, like a NASCAR fan like guide to the 2019 season. I'm planning for that to come out later this week. Also have some other exciting things in the works, so keep an eye out for those. Keep an eye on your sub boxes later this week. Got a couple pretty fun Out of the Grooves planned. So thanks everyone for watching. See you guys again very, very soon. Have a good rest of your weekend.